Hi and welcome back. For today's video we're heading to the Peak District and we're going to have a free camp so we can catch a sunset, then a sunrise and maybe a Milky Way in between. So here's the final image. It was taken at sunrise with quite a wide field of view and it was genuinely a beautiful place to visit.
So this one's going to be a little bit different. We're going for a night shot and a morning shot. We're going to a place called Mam Tor, which is a popular hill in the Peak District. Very small walk up it, and it's a great spot for some really wide scenic views around the Peak District. The journey over to Mam Tor, it's quite a nice one. It's largely a bunch of A roads, a little bit of countryside towards the other end. And you might have noticed I am on a slightly different bike to previous videos. This is a Honda VFR 800, which is my fun bike. It's not as comfortable on the motorways, but it's great fun to chuck about. A heck of a lot faster than my DeVille, and I love this bike. It's my first bike, and I've put, I think, 16,000 miles on it in the last 12 months. Which is quite a lot for bikes, and I've loved every minute of it. It's not very good in snow, but it's been out in all weathers. I'm trying to look after it a bit more now, so the DeVille gets used for the winter months, and this is more spring, summer, and spring is on its way, so it's a little bit cold, but it's sunny, and that's good enough for me. So the DeVille's parked and the VFR's out. Tonight, temperatures are going to drop as low as 0. That might sound cold, but as long as you have a decent sleeping bag and a hammock and an under hammock, very important, it's absolutely fine. I did -7 over December with a snow cam, and that was fine. So this won't be too bad tonight at all. So I'm just going to hop down here out of the wind noise a bit. Now we've reached the tops a little bit, it's getting a bit more interesting and scenic. So much more fields, less towns and villages. We'll zip along here for a little while now, and then we'll start heading in about 15 minutes towards Mam Tor. We are going to take a little detour down Winnett's Pass. We'll probably make a couple of passes on the path, because it's just beautiful, especially when the sun's dropping. It casts some nice shadows, and it tends to be a nice golden light at sunset as well. So we'll do that in a moment. Do have to be careful on cattle grids. This was the place I learned that. I came down here in the wet as one of my first ever rides out, and I went over a cattle grid at an angle and did a nice little drift. But look at this. Absolutely spectacular scenery. This is one of my favourite places to go. I know the camera footage isn't going to do this justice, because I've done this a few times before, but it is a beautiful place to roll down, this is. I've camped at the top on the right there in a tent before, which is quite nice, and it is quiet overnight. There's obviously a lot of traffic in the day, but it does settle down on an evening. But it's a really nice part of the world here. Love this. So we're going to drop right down to the bottom here, and then turn around and go back up this, and then we'll go park up for Mam Tor. Fantastic.
So hopefully this gives you some idea what Winners Pass is like. It's a really spectacular place to ride up, especially when the sun was low like it was, and you could see the tips of the rocks on the right just catching the last glimpses of the sun. It really was a nice detour just prior to Mam Tor, and it is right next to Mam Tor. You can see it from the adjacent road. From here we'll zip on up and park up and work our way up to do a free camp.
So we'll leave it in gear, and less chance of it rolling away. I'll get it all secured, and then we'll pop up that big hill there.
So I think this is worthy of a quick short video, just so you can see how spectacular this whole view is. So the sun should be setting in about the next 20 minutes or so, maybe half an hour, and we'll aim to get a shot of that valley in front of us with the sun dropping down to the left. But it's looking good so far.
I've got the 15 to 35 2.8 RF lens for this one, which is great for wide field views.
The 15 to 35 was actually the first RF lens I bought, and it's very versatile. The 2.8 aperture makes it usable in low light conditions, and it's fantastic for landscape. The image stabilisation on it is genuinely superb. Okay, so today's shot is a landscape shot, and a lot of the time on a landscape shot you'll increase the aperture to a higher number, a smaller hole for the light to get through, and this ensures that the whole field of view is crisp and sharp. So we were up at f10 for the aperture, which I consider quite high. Depending on the amount of light you've got, we'll try and keep the ISO as low as we can. I normally aim for below 800 for any landscapes if I can. In this case we had decent light at sunset and sunrise, and we were down at an ISO of 100. So it captured plenty of light without needing to increase that sensitivity. At a focal length of 22mm on our 15 to 35 lens, we were able to get a really good field of view, and we could see a wide range of the landscape. The last setting of the big three is the shutter speed. Shutter speed can vary wildly. Ordinarily for landscape I'm shooting on a tripod, but today I was handheld, so the shutter speed was quite fast. I had 1/200th of a second, and that was plenty to freeze what I wanted to. Single shot shooting, we weren't doing high speed shooting for this at all. We were on electronic shutter rather than mechanical shutter. It really didn't matter in this instance. Subject to detect was not required. You can leave that on any of the settings or set it to none. It will work just fine on the Canon R5 like that. Eye autofocus is not needed, but again it doesn't matter. You can leave that switched on. Note that I was recording to 2 memory cards. So there's an SD card and a compact flash express card in the Canon R5. I was recording to both. Now I always do that because it gives me some redundancy if anything happens to a card. On this trip that did happen, so I needed to use my compact flash card because my SD card developed a fault. I would recommend, if your camera supports dual slots, you fill both with memory cards and use both. And as usual, I'm shooting a high-res large JPEG file. So that's it for settings. So here are some of the best pictures taken on the day. You can probably see how staggering the landscape was. This was on the morning after as we woke up, and there was some great light being cast across the great ridge that you can see there in front of you. It really was a special trip. Both the evening for the sunset and the morning for the sunrise were fantastic, and that's the path back towards Mam Tor that we walked. The path itself is well paved. It's a nice easy walk, a few false summits to keep you guessing, but it's a good journey in the morning. So here we have the final picture that was chosen. As you can see, it was a phenomenal landscape and a really interesting light. I have let the sun blow out a little bit, and I want to keep that effect. I quite like that. This is where, if you're shooting raw, there's an argument of having underexposed and overexposed parts of the image, but I quite like that on this image. there are a few things we want to do to it to tweak it. So we'll start by duplicating the background and creating another layer. We always work in layers so we can easily undo what we've changed. I am going to start by shadows and highlights and decide whether I want to tweak that brightness down on the sun. So no shadows, I've dropped that to 0. Highlights, we can pull this in and see more detail, but I don't want to get it right down and have an artificial effect, and I don't want to lose the mist on the fields either. So I'll pull it down a little bit, probably about there. And that's all I'm going to do on this layer. Just drop that highlight down a little bit and create a new layer. You'll have probably guessed by now I like vibrant images, so I am going to play with vibrance and saturation. So the vibrance on this is the green of the fields, the orange of the sun, and the blue of the sky. So we can push that right up high. That looks very weird, but cool. I'm going to go for about there, about 31. In terms of saturation, it'll be much less. So just 8 on the saturation there. Let's just show you that effect. So with it off before and on after. So just a bit more warmth to those colour temperatures. There's a little more sky than I need, so I'm going to crop out some of that. And if you do follow the rule of thirds, you'll see the horizon sits just below the top third. So I could drop that down. I can level this horizon, but the shot is actually level as took, and it's quite level at the front here. So I'm not going to do that. So if we went for the third being on this right hand side of the image, that's your rule of thirds image. I quite like to use auto contrast. I think that usually does a good job of pulling the colours where I want them to be. And I also play with levels. You can pull in this left hand slider to have that same effect. I'm going to pull that down a little bit actually at the front end. Okay, so I've just dropped that forward 5. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just brighten up these trees a little. I don't want to do a lot here. I'm going to go for quite a large brush, about 300 pixels. It's 329 and exposure of about 20%. And we're just going to give a light dusting across these just to pull out a little bit more detail. I don't want to do too much because it will look really artificial if I do. Okay, so just give them a light touch. Let's see what that looks like. So before, after. Okay, so just a little bit of detail in the trees there. Similarly with this fence here, we can stand to pull this up a little bit. Okay, and then before and after. So these are relatively small changes, but they have quite a nice effect on the image. Just duplicate that layer again for the next changes. I am tempted to rotate the horizon a little bit. So we'll go image, rotation, and then arbitrary, and we could specify an angle. I'm just going to do it 4 degrees anti-clockwise. It's a bit too much. Undo that. Let's do 2 degrees. And then we'll run a crop across it just to see whether it's straight. It's not far off actually. Okay. And then if we crop to keep as much of the image as we can with the rotation. I want to see how that looks compared to keeping the foreground straight. It actually does look better, so I'm going to keep that. Okay, duplicate again. So we've gone from a nice but quite bland image to a much punchier final version. I'm just going to have a quick play with selective colour now to see if I want to make any changes to the image here. So by dropping the red slider to the left on the cyan category, you can make the sunset look more spectacular. It's probably more representative of how it was on the morning. You have to be very delicate with these changes because you can very quickly make an image look terrible. Let's see what that was like before and after. So it's just increased the reds and really brought out that sunrise. Okay, so the downside to taking colour out of the image is it can make it quite dull. So I'm just going to tweak the brightness a little bit on the next one. So I'll create a new layer for this. Okay, so the brightness works quite well, but I don't want to brighten the sun too much. So if we look at the layer below, that's how we started, and that's with the brightness. I just want to tone down this top part of the image a little bit with the brightness. So I'm going to put a layer mask on, and I'm going to do a very large brush. So I'm going to put it up to about 1000 pixels and a low opacity, so 5%. And then I'm just going to paste in some black, which will pull that down. Now, because I've set such a low opacity, it takes a lot of passes across this to make a difference. So if I turn this layer off, you'll see it is actually bringing it down. It might not feel like it when you're making the changes. So if I just disable the layer mask by holding Shift and clicking on it, you will see that it is toning down that sky. But I'm making very small changes with only a 5% opacity on the brush. Okay, happy with that. So if we look at the before, without the brightness increase, and the after, brightens the foreground, but keeping the sun in check. So the next thing I want to do is just bring down the highlight of the sun a little further with the burn tool. So I'm going to aim for the highlights and an exposure. I'm going to keep that low at 6%, and I've got a nice big brush at 1700 px. And I'm just going to pull that sun down a little bit further. I don't want to lose the brightness of it, that's too far. I don't want this grey effect. Okay, I think that's okay. No, it's not. So sometimes when you start switching the layers on and off, you realise that you've actually made it worse. That's a worse image than that. So I'm going to just lose that layer, and then we'll create another one. Okay, if anything, I'd say it's a little bit too red. So I'm just going to go to curves and select the red curve and just pull that down a small amount. There we go. So again, the before and after. I think that's okay. So I'm going to have a little 5-minute break and come back to that image and see if I still like it. Okay, so looking at the image again, I still think I've got a little bit too much red in. So I'm just going to go to curves again and red and just pull a tiny bit more out. I do want to maintain that red effect, but maybe not quite so much. I have just noticed I've left a big black triangle at the top right of the screen. So that's a consequence of the crop where I did the angle change. So I'm just going to crop that out. There we go. Okay, so that's our final image. Quite happy with that. Quite a big difference on this one. This is the original image and this is the processed image. You can see if I pop them side by side, we've made quite a considerable change here. And I think it's quite a nice, interesting image. Although it's slightly false coloured, I have emphasised the red because that's the effect I wanted. The reality is, on the morning, it was very, very much like this. If I pick another picture to show you, you will see that we did get that red effect captured in some of the photos. So here are a couple of photos showing this orangey red hue. And these were as captured out the camera. So if you look at those side by side, it's very similar tones to what we've done. So we'll keep that as our final image. So I hope you enjoyed that video. We certainly enjoyed making that one. Stay tuned for more content of the same nature.